When Steve Jobs died in 2011, the entire world believed it was the demise of Apple as well. The genius was gone, and the guy taking over was a quiet supply chain nerd from rural Alabama whose biggest talent was counting inventory. But 15 years later, that nerd has tripled the most valuable company on earth, built himself a $5 billion headquarters the size of a small town, and gets paid $74 million a year to run a company he owns almost none of. So who is Tim Cook, and what exactly has he built over the years? Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The most doubted man in tech history. We start in the worst possible moment of Tim Cook's life because that's where this whole story actually catches fire. It's October 2011. Steve Jobs, the turtleneck guy, the iPhone guy, arguably the most worshipped CEO who has ever lived, is dead at 56. And 6 weeks before he died, Jobs handed the keys to the most beloved company on the planet to a man almost nobody outside Cupertino could pick out of a lineup. The reaction was not exactly a warm welcome. Analysts openly said Apple's best days were behind it. The joke around Silicon Valley was brutal and simple. Steve was the artist, Tim's just the accountant. He'll keep the lights on for a couple years and then the magic dies with the founder. And honestly, you could see why people thought that. Because Tim Cook had never designed a product in his life. He didn't write code. He couldn't sketch a phone. His superpower, and I want you to really sit with how unglamorous this is, was making factories more efficient, moving boxes from point A to point B slightly faster than the other guy. That was the resume. That was the man inheriting the throne. So here's the question that this entire video is really about, and it's a genuinely wild one. How does the boring logistics guy, the man everyone underestimated, take a company worth roughly $350 billion and turn it into the first company in history to crack $4 trillion? That's not a typo. He didn't just keep the lights on. He more than tripled the most valuable thing humans have ever built. And he did it without inventing a single iconic gadget of his own. To understand how, you have to go back to a kid delivering newspapers before sunrise in a town you've never heard of. Chapter 2. The Paperboy from Nowhere, Alabama. Timothy Donald Cook was born on November 1, 1960, in Mobile, Alabama, and grew up in a place called Robertsdale, a small, flat, working-class farming town where, even now, basically nothing happens. His dad worked in a shipyard, doing brutal physical labor building ships. His mom worked at a pharmacy. This was not a family with money. This was a family that earned an honest living and went to bed tired. And little Tim was the textbook overachiever. He graduated second in his entire high school class, got voted most studious, which, let's be real, is the politest possible way your classmates can call you a nerd. And at 12 years old, he was already up before dawn, delivering the local newspaper to save for college. 12. While you were watching cartoons, this kid was running a paper route to fund his own education. He went to Auburn University, got a degree in industrial engineering, which is basically the science of making systems run smoother, faster, cheaper, and then grabbed an MBA from Duke, where he finished in the top 10%. Then came 12 years at IBM, a stint at Compaq, the whole 9 yards. And here's the thing that everyone misses. By the late 1990s, Tim Cook had quietly become one of the best supply chain operators in the entire computer industry. Not famous, not flashy, just devastatingly, ruthlessly good at the unsexy stuff, which is exactly the skill a dying company was desperate for. And in 1998, that dying company came calling. Speaking of cutting out the middleman and the waste, that kind of efficiency is exactly what pulled someone on our team to the Pulse R8 Smart Ring. It tracks your heart rate, your sleep, and your workouts straight from your finger. A week on a single charge, 100 days with the case, and it's fully waterproof. The part that got us was the price. Under $40, a fraction of what the big-name rings cost because it comes direct instead of through the retailers that mark everything up. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Because in 1998, that dying company came calling, and a 5-minute decision was about to make billions. Chapter 3. The 5-minute decision that made billions. Picture the scene. It's 1998. Apple is, by basically every metric, circling the drain. Bleeding money, stock in the gutter, 90 days from bankruptcy according to some accounts. Steve Jobs has just clawed his way back into the company he founded, and he's hunting for someone to fix the operational disaster behind the scenes. Everyone he talks to in the industry keeps saying the same name: Tim Cook. But here's the part I love. Cook didn't want the job at all. He had a comfortable, high-paying gig at Compaq, which at the time was the #1 PC maker in the world. Why on earth would he leave the winner to go join the company everyone expected to die? On paper, taking the Apple job was career suicide, and then he sat down with Steve Jobs for one meeting. 1. Cook later said that in a few minutes, talking to Jobs, he heard about a strategy that just lit something up in him. He said any careful person looking at it rationally would have stayed at Compaq, and that his gut overrode every logical bone in his body. So in March 1998, he walked away from the safe bet and joined the sinking ship. That single decision is the hinge the entire modern world swings on. Because Cook walked in and did exactly what he was built to do. He took Apple's bloated, money-hemorrhaging supply chain and absolutely demolished the waste. He slashed inventory from months down to days. He closed warehouses. He got products to customers faster than anyone thought possible. And while everyone was rightfully losing their minds over Jobs' beautiful iMac, it was Cook's invisible machine in the background that actually made the money. Jobs dreamed it. Cook delivered it, on time, at scale, for profit. By 2005, Jobs made him Chief Operating Officer. And here's where it gets heavy, because Jobs' health was already failing, and he needed someone he could trust to run the whole thing while he fought for his life. That someone was the paperboy from Alabama. Which brings us to the throne nobody believed he could sit on. Chapter 4. How the Accountant Out-Earned the Genius. So Cook takes over in 2011, drowning in doubt, and he does something that, looking back, was quietly genius. He didn't try to be Steve Jobs. He knew he wasn't the showman, the visionary, the guy who could make a crowd gasp at a product reveal. So instead of faking it, he played a completely different game, his game. While Jobs was the spark, Cook was the compounding machine. He took the iPhone, already a hit, and turned it into the most profitable product in human history by relentlessly optimizing every link in the chain. Then he did the thing Wall Street is still obsessed with. He pivoted Apple from selling you gadgets once to charging you forever. Think about it. iCloud storage, Apple Music, the App Store cut, Apple TV, Apple Pay. Suddenly, Apple wasn't just a company that sold you a phone, it was a company collecting a little toll from you every single month for the rest of your life. That services business now pulls in tens of billions a year, and it barely existed before Cook made it a priority. And the results genuinely embarrass the doubters. The guy everyone called a placeholder grew Apple into the first company ever worth $4 trillion, which it hit in 2025, making it just the third company in history to even touch that number. Let me put $4 trillion in perspective for a second, because the number is so big it stops meaning anything. It's larger than the entire economy of countries like Germany or Japan. Tim Cook runs something more valuable than most nations on Earth. So when people still say, yeah, but Jobs built Apple, sure he did. But by raw numbers, the calm Alabama operations guy created more shareholder value than the genius did. That's not an insult to Jobs. It's just a fact that almost nobody gives Cook credit for. And speaking of numbers nobody can quite believe. Let's talk about what he actually gets paid, because it's genuinely absurd. Chapter 5. $74 million. A year. And he drives a used BMW. Here's a fact that breaks most people's brains. In 2025, Tim Cook's total pay package was around $74.3 million. $74 million in a single year. To buy a sense of scale, that's enough money to walk into an Apple store and buy roughly 90,000 brand new iPhones for fun every year. But here's the twist that makes it interesting instead of just gross. His actual salary, the boring base paycheck, is only $3 million of that. And it's been stuck at $3 million since 2016. He hasn't taken a raise on his base pay in basically a decade. So where does the other $71 million come from? Stock. Huge piles of Apple stock awarded based on how well the company performs. The better Apple does, the richer Cook gets, which means his incentives are bolted directly to yours if you own the stock. Apple wins, he wins. Apple slips, his payday shrinks. It's actually a pretty elegant trap. Now here's the part that genuinely surprises people, and it cuts against everything you'd assume about a guy running a $4 trillion empire. Tim Cook does not own Apple. Not even close. His personal stake in the company is something like 0.02%, 0.02%. He is a hired hand, an employee with a spectacular paycheck, not a founder sitting on a mountain of his own company. His personal net worth lands somewhere around $2 billion, which sounds like a lot until you remember the company he runs is worth 2,000 times that. There's even a side hustle most people have no clue about. Cook has sat on Nike's board since 2005, where he's the lead independent director, picking up extra compensation and Nike stock on the side. The man who runs Apple also helps steer the world's biggest sneaker company in his spare time. And here's the kicker on all this money. Cook has publicly said he plans to give most of it away before he dies. He's described his fortune as a tool, not a trophy, and committed to donating the bulk of it to charity. So the $74 million a year isn't building a dynasty. It's mostly going back out the door. And that gap, billionaire CEO, but a rounding error of ownership, planning to give the pile away anyway, explains the single weirdest thing about how this man actually lives. Quick game. Picture how a $2 billion tech CEO lives. Fleet of Lamborghinis, mega yacht, a house with its own zip code. Yeah, throw all of that out, because Tim Cook might be the least flashy billionaire alive, and it's honestly kind of refreshing. The man's primary home is in Palo Alto, and it is not a palace. He bought it back in 2010 for around $1.9 million, which in Silicon Valley money is practically a starter home. It's a modest Spanish-style place about 2,400 square feet. That's it. A guy who could buy literally any house on the planet lives in something a successful dentist could afford. For years, his daily driver was a used BMW 5 Series, not a new one, an older one. And people would do double takes realizing the head of Apple was rolling around in a car your uncle might own. To Cook, a car gets you from here to there. It's not a personality. And his daily routine is borderline psychotic in its discipline. The man reportedly wakes up at 3:45 in the morning. Not 6, not 5, 3:45 a.m. He starts firing through emails before most of us have hit snooze for the first time, hits the gym, eats clean, and runs his life like one of his own supply chains. Lean, optimized, zero waste. His idea of a wild time is a long bike ride or a hike in the desert. He tracks his own steps and heart rate on an Apple Watch like a regular gym guy. The most powerful man in tech goes to bed early and counts his rings. But before you decide he's just a frugal monk who hates spending money, hold on. Because there's one thing Tim Cook spent on that absolutely shatters the modest guy image, and it's the reason this video is called what it's called. Chapter 6. The $5 billion spaceship that is basically a city. So the title promised you a man who built his own city. Here's the payoff, and it's wilder than it sounds. It's called Apple Park, and calling it an office is like calling the ocean some water. This thing cost around $5 billion to build. It's a perfect glass ring, a full mile around. It would take you about 15 minutes just to walk one lap of the building. It sits on 175 acres in Cupertino, houses around 12,000 employees, and the locals nicknamed it the spaceship because from the air it looks like a UFO parked in California. But here's why I'll defend calling it a city with a straight face. This place runs on 100% renewable energy and generates a massive chunk of its own power from one of the biggest rooftop solar setups on Earth, so it doesn't even need the regular grid to keep the lights on. It has its own on-site facilities, its own security force, miles of walking trails, and over 9,000 trees they planted on what used to be a sea of asphalt. It's the largest naturally ventilated building in the world, meaning for most of the year it needs no heating or air conditioning at all, because the building breathes by itself. It generates its own energy, grows its own forest, runs its own services, and 12,000 people live their working lives inside it. If that's not a tiny self-sufficient city in the shape of a donut, I don't know what is. Now here's the detail that gives me chills. Apple Park wasn't really Tim Cook's dream. It was Steve Jobs' final project. Jobs personally pitched the design to the Cupertino City Council in 2011, just months before he died. He never got to set foot in the finished building. So every single day, the man everyone said could never fill Jobs' shoes walks into a $5 billion monument that Jobs designed but never lived to see, and runs the empire from inside his dead mentor's last dream. Cook even named the theater on campus after Jobs. The whole thing is a tribute the founder never got to witness. Which leaves exactly one question hanging over all of it. But before the exit, because there's a whole side of Cook the highlight reel skips, let's talk about the fights, the politics, and the one personal revelation that made history. Chapter 7. The Tightrope. China, Trump, and Coming Out. For a guy famous for being calm, Tim Cook has spent 15 years walking some of the most dangerous tightropes in global business. And the biggest one is a country. Here's the uncomfortable truth at the heart of Apple's success. A massive chunk of every iPhone on Earth is built in China. That supply chain Cook engineered? It's a marvel. Genuinely one of the most sophisticated operations humans have ever run. And it's also Apple's single greatest vulnerability. When President Trump came in swinging on tariffs and demanding iPhones be built in America, Cook was suddenly caught between the US government and the country that physically makes his products. Most CEOs would have picked a side and gotten flattened. Cook did something craftier. He played both. He quietly shifted a huge slice of manufacturing to India and Vietnam to dodge the tariff exposure, while keeping the China relationship warm enough not to blow up his own factory floor. He even managed Trump personally with almost comic patience. When Trump infamously called him Tim Apple by accident, Cook just rolled with it. No ego, no fight, relationship intact. The man treats confrontation like a problem to be optimized away rather than a battle to be won. Then there's the moment that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with guts. In 2014, Tim Cook publicly came out as gay, writing that he considered it among the greatest gifts of his life. With that, he became the first ever openly gay CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And he was crystal clear about why he did it. Not for himself, but because he figured if a kid getting bullied somewhere saw the guy running Apple say it out loud and stand tall, it might be the thing that got them through the day. For the most private man in tech to crack open the most personal part of his life, on purpose to help strangers he'd never meet. That tells you more about who he is than any earnings report ever could. He's taken the same stubborn line on privacy, flat out refusing to treat your data as a product to be sold and calling privacy a basic human right. Love him or not, the pattern is consistent. Cook fights. But he fights quietly, and he usually wins by outlasting everyone else in the room. Which finally brings us to the question hanging over all of it. Chapter 8. The exit nobody knows how to replace. Here's the live, happening right now part of the story. The kind of thing that's actually unfolding as people watch this. As of early 2026, the rumors that Tim Cook is heading for the exit have gone from whispers to headlines. Reporting suggests Cook has told Apple's board he wants to ease off, and the company is quietly preparing for life after him, possibly bumping him up to chairman while a successor takes the CEO chair. The name everyone keeps floating is John Ternus, Apple's head of hardware engineering, a guy in his early 50s who's been deep inside the machine for years. Nothing's official. But the most stable CEO chair in tech suddenly has a question mark hovering over it. And here's the beautiful full-circle irony of it. 15 years ago, the entire world panicked that Apple couldn't possibly survive losing its irreplaceable leader. They were wrong. Cook didn't just survive Jobs, he lapped him. But now Apple faces the exact same terrifying question all over again, except this time the irreplaceable leader is the quiet supply chain guy from Alabama that everyone wrote off in the first place. The man they swore was just a seat warmer became so good that replacing him is now the scariest problem in Silicon Valley. Funny how that works, no? The most doubted man in tech history turned into the one nobody can figure out how to live without. Not bad for a paperboy from Robertsdale who never designed a single thing, and quietly built a city, tripled an empire, and proved that sometimes the person who finishes the dream matters just as much as the one who dreamed it. So what part of Tim Cook's story did you find the most interesting? Let us know in the comments. Also, if stories about the people who built and run the most fascinating empires in the world are what brought you here, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Global Status, and we'll keep delivering them. See you in the next one.